Raiders hosting. Jalen Milroe. What does this mean for the team? The Las Vegas Raiders are reportedly bringing in quarterback Jalen Milroe for a private visit, and this move has raised plenty of interesting questions. Why would the Raiders be looking at Milroe? What does this mean for their future? Let's dive into the potential implications of this visit and why the Raiders might see Milroe as a key piece for their long-term plans. First off, Milroe is a quarterback I personally believe has a lot of potential. His upside is immense, and when I watched his film earlier in the process, I wasn't just impressed by his current skills, but by what he could eventually become. His explosive ability was evident from early in the season, and while he did struggle toward the end, it doesn't overshadow the raw talent he possesses. Milroe's stock might have slipped due to his inconsistent finish, but he still represents an exciting prospect with a lot of room for growth. What I like about Milroe is that he's a player who could thrive in a system that nurtures his development, one that doesn't demand too much too soon, but allows him to gradually refine his skills. Now, why would the Raiders be interested in a quarterback like Milroe? It's no secret that the Raiders are looking for their next franchise quarterback. While Geno Smith may be able to lead the team for a few more years, at 35, his window is limited. The Raiders need to find someone they can develop for the future, and Milroe could be just that guy. This visit shows that they're looking at all options and thinking ahead. John Spytek, Pete Carroll, and the Raiders front office are savvy. They understand that a balanced approach is necessary, not just focusing on winning now, but also planning for the long-term future. Milroe fits into that vision perfectly. He's not an immediate starter, but with the right development, he could become a quarterback the Raiders can build around. Looking at Milroe's tape, there's no denying his speed and athleticism. He's reminiscent of Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts in terms of his explosiveness. While he might not have the same level of raw athleticism as Lamar Jackson, Milroe is certainly in the same conversation. When Jackson entered the league, many were skeptical of his prospects. But over time, the Ravens built a system around him that played to his strengths. And now, Lamar Jackson is regarded as one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Milroe's development may take a bit longer, especially as a passer. His ability to read defenses and make progressions is still a work in progress, but that's where the Raiders can help. If they're able to establish a strong running game and give Milroe the time to sit and learn behind a veteran like Geno Smith, he could develop into a very capable starter in a few years. Imagine a scenario where Milroe has 2 to 3 years to grow, with Smith leading the charge in the interim. That's a real possibility for the Raiders. Milroe's potential as a dual-threat quarterback, with a 4.3-second 40-yard dash time, adds an exciting dimension to the Raiders' future. While Milroe might not be a first-round pick, he could be a steal in the second or third round. There's certainly a chance he slips further, and the Raiders could grab him at a value spot. That would be a massive win for their future plans. Why Jalen Milroe could be a steal for the Raiders. When it comes to quarterbacks in this draft, I don't think Jalen Milroe will be available for long. Some people may not have him as a top-tier prospect, but his potential is undeniable. If you ask me, would I rather take Shatter Sanders with the 6th overall pick or Jalen Milroe with the 50th? I believe some teams would pick Milroe over Sanders, and here's why. Milroe might not be perfect right now, particularly when it comes to reading coverages, but that's something that can be developed with time. Reading defenses is a skill that quarterbacks improve at the more they play and the better coaching they get. Milroe's best football is still ahead of him, and we need to remember that he's only started for 2 years. He has a ton of upside, and you can't teach the kind of athleticism he brings to the table. Jordan Schultz recently tweeted an insightful comment from an NFL assistant general manager who spoke highly of Milroe. According to the GM, Milroe is one of the most intriguing players in the entire draft. There's a misconception that he's just a running quarterback, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Milroe's deep ball could be a huge weapon at the next level, and he's proven to be very capable in the pocket, particularly when attacking zone defenses. I completely agree with that assessment. Watching Milroe's tape, the athletic profile jumps off the screen. His speed is something special. He can easily outrun defenders and keep plays alive. But beyond that, his deep ball is impressive. He's shown the ability to push the ball downfield with accuracy and arm strength. He's also demonstrated the ability to handle zone coverage, though I'll note that college zone defenses are not the same as what he'll face in the NFL. In the NFL, the field shrinks, and players are faster and more skilled. Milroe will need to adjust to that. His reads will need to be quicker, and he'll need to get the ball out faster. But again, That's something that can be developed with time, especially with the right coaching. If Milroe lands in a system with strong players around him, a good wide receiver group, an elite tight end like Brock Bowers, and a solid offensive line, he could thrive. For the Raiders, bringing in Milroe and allowing him to develop could be a great move. We've seen similar situations before, with players like Geno Smith, who didn't see much playing time early in his career but eventually blossomed into a quality starter. Milroe could follow a similar trajectory. If the Raiders can give him the time to sit, learn, and develop, he could eventually become a very effective quarterback. And speaking of Geno Smith, Pete Carroll recently spoke about him, shedding light on how Smith's career took off after sitting for several years. Carroll's words are worth noting because they align with the kind of development Milroe could experience. At the coaches' annual meeting, Carroll shared his thoughts on Smith, saying that he's always been a great worker, incredibly talented, and a natural leader. Smith's career, especially after sitting for 6 years, is a testament to what's possible when a player is given the time and coaching to develop. Carroll praised Smith's work ethic, leadership, and how he took every opportunity to grow, even when he wasn't on the field. Smith's resilience paid off, and now he's one of the NFL's top quarterbacks. Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, and the Raiders' QB future. It's clear that Pete Carroll is extremely excited about keeping Geno Smith around. Carroll recently mentioned that he's been in constant communication with Smith, and as soon as the report surfaced that Smith might be available, the Seahawks were all over it. The trade was quickly made, and it didn't take much to pull it off. The Raiders gave up their 92nd pick, which is a very late third-rounder. So from a value perspective, this is a major win for the Raiders. Not only does this trade secure a quarterback for the future, but it also brings a player who thrived under Carroll's system. Carroll's confidence in Smith, based on their successful history together, is evident. This is a player Carroll is excited to continue working with, which speaks volumes about Smith's potential moving forward. Regarding contract details, General Manager John Spytek didn't get too specific, but he did mention that the Raiders are working on an extension with Geno Smith. Carroll also echoed this sentiment, confirming that they're actively negotiating. As for the Raiders' quarterback plans, it seems likely they'll look to keep Smith for at least 3 years. A 2-year extension would give Smith 3 total years with the team, and a 4th year could be an option for the Raiders, giving them some flexibility. While there's been speculation that the Raiders might be intentionally leaving the contract situation up in the air, it could also be a strategic move to keep other teams guessing. If some teams think the Raiders won't lock in Smith, they might hesitate to draft another quarterback, giving the Raiders a chance to get a better prospect later in the draft. I fully expect the extension to happen, but my guess is that it will take place after the draft. It makes sense for the Raiders to let the speculation build a little longer, creating some pressure on other teams. This could also help them secure a better player in the draft. Raiders' offensive line plans and prospects. On the offensive line front, another interesting update came from Vic Taper, who shared details from his conversation with John Spytek regarding the Raiders' interior line competition. Spytek revealed that the Raiders are looking at 4 players competing for the 2 starting guard spots: Paris Johnson, Dylan Parham, Alex Cappa, and Jordan Meredith. Additionally, the 3 players other than Cappa, Johnson, Parham, and Meredith, will also compete for the starting center job. This is noteworthy because the Raiders recently brought in Charles Grant and Will Campbell for visits, both of whom are expected to play as guards in the NFL. However, I could see Grant playing tackle as well, given his impressive arm length. This raises the question: if the Raiders are confident in the players already competing for the guard and center spots, why bring in additional prospects like Grant and Campbell? It's a valid thought, and it shows that the Raiders are continuing to evaluate all options on the offensive line. Based on Spytek's comments, it seems likely that Alex Cappa and Dylan Parham will end up as the starting guards, with Paris Johnson potentially stepping into the center role. But with the addition of Grant and Campbell, the Raiders are keeping their options open, ensuring they have the best possible players on the line. Raiders' offensive line and wide receiver plans. There's been a lot of speculation about the Raiders potentially targeting players like Will Campbell or Charles Grant in the 2nd round if they're still available. Both of these players are considered to be all-pro caliber prospects, and if the Raiders were to land one of them, they could slot into a starting guard position. It's an intriguing idea, especially given the Raiders' current situation on the offensive line. That said, I'm not entirely convinced the Raiders are set with their current guard options: Dylan Parham, Alex Cappa, and Jordan Meredith. If those are the guys the Raiders are relying on, I'm not sure the offensive line will crack the top 15 in the league. Alex Cappa, in particular, is a bit of an unknown after his injury. While he showed promise before the injury, he hasn't looked the same since returning. I've noticed that Kappa tends to get pushed around by stronger defenders, which raises some concerns. Dylan Parham has had some flashes of good play, but he hasn't been consistently reliable. Jordan Merritt, on the other hand, can hold his own against about 80% of defensive tackles, but really struggles against the elite 20%. So, the uncertainty around the offensive line is definitely something to keep an eye on. However, John Spytek, the Raiders' GM, has been tight-lipped about revealing who they plan to draft, which makes sense. You don't want to tip your hand too early. But personally, I'd love for the Raiders to just announce Paris Johnson as their starting center. Based on the tape I've seen, Johnson is already one of the top 2 or 3 centers in the league. By next season, he could easily be the best center in the NFL. It doesn't make sense to put Johnson at guard. Guards are easier to find, but elite centers like him are rare. There's only one other center in the league right now who comes close to Johnson's level, and that's Creed Humphrey from the Chiefs. These guys have a unique ability to dominate, and the Raiders should take full advantage of that. Raiders eyeing veteran WR and draft options. In addition to addressing the offensive line, the Raiders are also looking to add another weapon to their receiving core. Spytek mentioned that the team is considering a few free agent wide receivers, and he's also high on this year's draft class. I think the wide receiver class is one of the deepest we've seen in years, with as many as 5 receivers likely to go in the first round. 7 could even go in the top 45 picks, which shows just how loaded this group is. The Raiders are also keeping tabs on Hunter Renfrow. He recently had a visit with the team, but based on Spytek's comments, it doesn't seem like the Raiders are overly invested in bringing him back. It could be more about generating interest from other teams. After all, the Panthers also showed interest in Renfrow, so this visit could just be part of the process to see where his value lies. However, the Raiders are looking at free agents as well, including big names like Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper. Both of these players could be legitimate number 1 receivers for the Raiders. Keenan Allen, with his ability to run precise routes and find space in the middle of the field, would be a huge asset. Amari Cooper, while not quite the same style of player, is still an excellent receiver who can make plays in key situations. And don't forget about Brock Bowers, who's technically a tight end, but has the skills of a number 1 receiving option. His versatility makes him an intriguing prospect, and he could be another weapon for the Raiders to consider as they build their offense. Raiders wide receiver options and future outlook. When it comes to wide receivers, Amari Cooper is a player the Raiders should seriously consider. Despite being 31 years old when the season starts, Cooper remains a great route runner with the ability to get open consistently. He could complement Brock Bowers well on the offense, as Bowers could take on some wide receiver duties. Cooper's route running ability and separation skills would give the Raiders another dynamic option on the field. I know Cooper's age might raise some concerns, but if the Raiders could secure him on a reasonable $10 million contract, it would be a solid move. If Cooper can produce around 750 yards on about 70 targets, it would be a huge win for the Raiders. At that point, Cooper would likely be their number 1 receiver, although Jacoby Myers would also be in the mix. In terms of route running and separation, Cooper is definitely superior to Myers. Even though his stint with the Buffalo Bills didn't work out, it's important to remember that Cooper had a massive season the year before with over 1,200 yards. He's still a capable player, and the Raiders are still in need of a top-tier wide receiver. Another receiver the Raiders could look at is Tyler Lockett, who has a connection with Pete Carroll. However, Lockett will be 33 years old when the season begins, and I'm not as high on him. Similarly, Robert Woods, also at 33, is a reliable option, but doesn't provide the same upside as some younger players. As for Deontay Johnson, I feel he's been a little overrated, so I'm not sure he'd be the right fit. The best move for the Raiders might be to sign Amari Cooper to a 2-year contract. The first year could be fully guaranteed, and the second year could be a team option, giving the Raiders flexibility. If it doesn't work out, they could move on from him after the first year. Having Cooper on the team would make the offense better and provide Geno Smith with another reliable weapon, reducing the pressure on the Raiders to draft a wide receiver high. Going into the draft without the need to prioritize a wide receiver would give the Raiders the freedom to draft the best available talent at other positions, whether it's a guard, defensive line, or another area of need. This could be the ideal situation for the team, as it allows them to focus on other areas of their roster and strengthen the team without feeling forced into specific draft picks. I also hope the Raiders continue to load up on talented players for the offense. Adding playmakers like Asen Genti, Kyle Williams, and Travis Hunter would only help give Geno Smith more options and the chance to make a deep playoff push or even compete for a Super Bowl. The Raiders' defensive line could also be a game changer this year. With a strong defensive line, they could dominate and take over games, much like the Eagles did in the Super Bowl, by wreaking havoc on the Chiefs' offensive line and consistently pressuring Patrick Mahomes. The potential for the Raiders to build a championship contending team is there, and I'm excited to see what happens. There's a lot of upside, and I'm optimistic about what the future holds. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, hit the thumbs up, and subscribe for more updates. I'll see you next time with another video.